home feeling like, oh, well, that was fun, that was wonderful, and I'm just going to get on with my life as it was. I'm here to challenge some norms. Because this is the 10th annual Friedman Conference, and there are conferences of this type all over the world. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but things don't tend to be moving in our direction at the moment. Maybe we need to have a bit of a think about how we're doing what we're doing. The question that I pose to you to close this conference is, how do we limit government? We're libertarians. We talk about limiting government. We say we want government to have limited power. We want people to have more power over their own lives and for the government to have less. Cool. Cool story, bro. How's that going? Not well at the moment. So how, at a practical level, do we limit government? Well, here are some of the attempts that we've made to practically apply this concept of limiting government. Things like the Roman Republic was an effort to limit the overall power of government. It became the Roman Empire, didn't it? Magna Carta failed within a week. They wrote another one. That never really had a lot of impact. It's honoured in the breach far more than it is in reality. The US Bill of Rights, we've just heard from Spike, not going so well. Separation of powers, the idea of having 3 different branches of government so that the government can all investigate each other. Talk to any Victorian or anyone from West Australia about how that's going and how well the courts are doing holding the executive branch accountable. Or you can vote better. That one's working well too, isn't it? Limiting the power of government will all have failed. They can work for a time. They can have the appearance of working, but they all fail. Here's the uncomfortable truth, and it's going to get more uncomfortable as we go along. The only thing that limits government power is the limit of our obedience. Now, if you get that, then I can just close the laptop, we can all go drinking, right? Because that's the whole point. But I think we might need to explore it a little more deeply. We cannot claim to believe in limited government if we are not willing individually to limit our obedience to it. If we wish to limit government, then we must be quick to reach the limit of our obedience. This is not a new idea. It's been around for a very long time, in fact. Aristotle. It is not always the same thing to be a good man and a good citizen. Mahatma Gandhi. An unjust law is itself a species of violence, and arrest for its breach is more so. Howard Zinn. Protest beyond the law is not a departure from democracy. It is absolutely essential to it. Essential. Not optional. Democracy doesn't work without it. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. Martin Luther King Jr. I distilled all of those ideas down to these 5 words that may be familiar to anyone who's been walking around the conference, and Spike is so wonderfully showing off a Good People Break Bad Laws t-shirt for me now. This is my 5-word summary of that idea that has existed for thousands of years. I claim no credit for the idea, but this is my 5-word summary. Now, people, when they see this, sometimes find it very confronting. And an automatic response that I've heard time and time again is that if you're breaking the law, you're not a good person. As though the law is the arbiter, is the barometer by which you measure goodness. And I used to think like that. I used to believe that. I would challenge anyone who's questioning this good people break bad laws idea to try and invert the statement and see how you go. Good people obey bad laws. That's got problems. Good people just follow orders. Where have I heard that before? Can't think of it. Good people assume that anyone giving orders is automatically good. I had this. This was quite shocking to me. Someone that I know and care about who's a police officer in Victoria and was a police officer all through the madness. I challenged that person and I said, you are morally responsible for the decisions that you make. Even if you're following orders, you're still morally responsible. And they looked at me dead in the eye with no irony. This was not a joke, although I wish it were. They said to me, no, that's the responsibility of the person giving the orders. Once they give the order, it's my responsibility to follow it. And my blood ran cold. Because that does sound familiar, doesn't it? Some people say we can't all just pick and choose which laws we obey. That would be anarchy. To which I go, and? Yes, Is there a point here? Moral cowardice is the great scourge of our time and the source of most of our problems. And if we really want to be serious about limiting government, then we have to get serious about moral cowardice. The tragedy is that people will break their conscience to obey the law. And that's exactly the reverse of how it needs to be. An individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. Said by some bloke who probably knew a thing or two about civil disobedience. What is a bad law? Let's define our terms here. A lot of people object, how do you know when a law is bad? Everyone's going to be making their own decisions, so one person's going to think this, one person's going to think that. Let's start with a fairly simple working definition. And I'm going to give you two that are complementary to each other. One is outcomes-based, it's practical, and the other is principles-based. Both of them apply. If obeying or enforcing it causes more harm than breaking it, it's a bad law. If obeying or enforcing it causes more harm than breaking it, it is automatically, without any other consideration needing to be made, a bad law. Alternatively, if it breaches basic human rights or subjugates free people, remembering that the government is supposed to be the servant and not the other way around, then it is a bad law. Those are the laws I'm talking about. Not talking about laws like don't kill your next door neighbour because you wanted his big flat screen TV. Those laws are not bad laws because you're harming somebody. I'm talking about laws that meet one of these two definitions. A practical test and a principles test. The COVID laws, and I want to get to a specific example here. The COVID laws failed both of these tests and failed them very obviously. Now, does everyone here kind of know my story? Kind of know a little bit? I'm seeing nodding heads and I'm seeing blank stares. Okay, cool. Let me blast through it really, really quick. I first spoke out about the injustice of lockdowns in March 2020. Yes, that's the very same month when the lockdowns began. I kept up to date with the data that was coming out of Israel, out of Sweden, and out of Italy. All of the itemised data broken down by age group and comorbidities of who was dying and how many were dying per infection of COVID-19. And by the end of March, we had enough data to know that this was not the Black Plague. It was not even the Spanish flu. Okay, it was something below that level. We didn't know for sure yet, but it was below that level. And it was very evident to me that a full lockdown strategy was a massive overreaction given what we now knew. I spoke out at the very first formal anti-lockdown protest held in Australia. It was on Anzac Day 2020. 70 people showed up. Now, what was significant about that day for me was I was 39. And for the first time in my life, I walked out my door with the intention of breaking the law. I'm a clean skin, about as clean as you can get. I grew up in a God-fearing conservative household. We had our own Holy Trinity. There was God the Father, God the Son, and God the Johnny Howard, right? And I was like, okay, when they brought out the helmet laws, that you had to wear a helmet when you're riding a bike, when my mum brought home a helmet about 2 months before the laws actually came into effect, I started wearing it straight away just because I wanted to see the smile on her face and have her tell me what a good boy I was. That's the kind of person. I have a very extensive police record. You know what it is? Handing in wallets that I've found. Staying as an eyewitness to a crash that I saw or a crime that I saw. Okay? That's my police record until this. And then I walked out my door as a 39-year-old father to break the law. I was a part of that movement from that 70-person meeting all the way through to, I'll show you later on, as it waxed and as it waned. I always tried to stay out of trouble. The protests were trouble. I'm not an idiot, and I'm not a fighter. And I'm not the sort of person who gets on the front line and gets in the face of a police officer and tries to make their day miserable. I just want to exercise my human right to engage in political protest on an important issue of our time. That's all I wanted. The police, though, were determined to bring trouble to me and to others. There was tear gas. I've been hit with batons. I've been chased. I used to live stream constantly. And I would commentate all the way through what was going on and tactically what I was looking out for and thinking about as I went along. And I almost began to view it as an educational piece of how do you manage to get into and out of very hot protest zones without getting arrested and without getting the shit kicked out of you. Right? Fun little challenge every weekend. I lost a fair bit of weight, actually. It was good. And then afterwards, I'd actually do debrief videos. I'd sit down after these protests in my garage at home and I'd smoke a cigar, just largely to calm my nerves. And I would talk through what happened or what worked and what didn't and how we needed to clean up our messaging and all of these sorts of issues. And I remember one particular time I was talking about how to get in and out, how to be invisible, how to be the grey man when the police are before and after the protest trying to pick off protesters before they get in and then when they're on their way home. And I talked about the need to look like you had another context. There had to be some other obvious explanation about you just looking at you as to why you were there. Things like a folded up Safeway shopping bag hanging partway out of your pocket instantly gives that police officer who's profiling people a context. He's on his way to the shops. A coffee cup in your hand if you're wearing exercise type clothing and you're not running, you know, going along at a brisk pace with a coffee cup in your hand, you blend in. And I said this. And about 4 days later, Victoria Police were found to be checking people's coffee cups to make sure they still had coffee in them.
If I check if there's actually anything in that.
Oh, yeah, there's coffee in there.
Enjoy your coffee.
Thank you. Jesus loves you all. God bless, myself included. I work out.
Would you just mind if I check if there's actually anything in that?
Oh, yeah, there's coffee in there.
Enjoy your coffee.
Thank you.
Right, so now I knew the cops were watching me. Because that happened the very same week. I said to everybody, hey, this is what you need to do. This is how you do it. Interesting. So, hang on. Okay. Now, if you've seen Battleground Melbourne, you'll know about all the arrests that were happening at this time. The doors being kicked in, all that stuff. And I knew for a fact now that they were watching my work. And I started to feel a bit offended. Because if they're watching me, clearly they know I exist. They've seen my work. And they're kicking down other people's doors and dragging them away. What's wrong with me? Am I not pretty enough? Am I not effective here? Am I not cutting through? Eventually they came for me and I got arrested and I got charged with incitement. And Spike was talking about the use of laws for an improper purpose. They sell it based on this and then they use it over here. The incitement laws that I'm still fighting, by the way, the 2 criminal charges of incitement, the incitement charge was designed to deal with criminals who incited other people to commit acts of violence, things like murder, terrorism. The terrorism excuse, right, was used to justify the need for incitement laws. Now they're being used against people who said carry a coffee cup when you go to a protest so that you blend in, you'll be able to exercise your human rights. Still fighting those criminal charges to this day. So the point is that these COVID laws and what I saw and many others saw and lived through failed the test of what is a bad law, both on practicality and on principle. So, good people break bad laws. We've talked a little bit about what bad laws are. But now let's talk about the practical reality. Who goes first? You know how if I had $1 for every time someone came up to me and said, what we need to do is just get everyone to stop paying taxes. Cool, you first, right? What we need to do is all get out on the streets and have a massive protest so big that the police can't shut us down and can't tear gas us and can't arrest us all. Cool. Are you willing to step out your door to walk into a protest having no idea whether it will be big enough to fit that description or whether it will be small enough that you get the crap kicked out of you and you get arrested? Who's going to go first? By definition, I'm getting to the meat of this now. I want you to hear me, please. The person who goes first is an outlier. By definition, we heard about the bell curve, right? That person, everyone's sitting there, we're all in the same boat, we're all sitting there going, these lockdowns suck. Well, actually, no, not everyone was. Most people were like, hey, this is cool, free money, watch TV, play computer games, cool. A percentage of people are going, this sucks. A percentage of those people are going, someone should do something about this. And out of the 6.5 million people in Victoria, 70 showed up in a park for that very first protest. And can I tell you, there were some weirdos out there. There were some people that are well and truly on the edge of the bell curve, and I'm probably one of them, but I wasn't the furthest, right? There were some people out there. By definition, an outlier, by definition, that person who goes first is going to be weird. If they weren't, then they'd be in a crowd of people sitting at home. The fact that they're there means they're weird. By definition, the first person that stands up to bad laws is going to be a weirdo. And if they're an outlier and a weirdo in one area and willing to take that stand, chances are they're an outlier and a weirdo in lots of areas. And it's very easy for the media to attack them and find weaknesses and weak points to attack and criticize and make them out to be some crank and whack job. That's part of the territory, guys. Because if the weirdo outliers don't go first, then no one does. By definition, when you stand up and you stand up against bad laws, you find yourself in the company of outliers, weirdos, and even assholes. Because those are the personality types and the psychological profiles that will actually get off their couch and get out there first. So, let's talk about assholes for a second. I agonized for a long time over whether I was going to do the ARSE or the ASS. I went for the ARSE. Let's talk about some historical assholes, shall we? Galileo, Ignaz Semmelweis. They were both cantankerous, argumentative, rude, aggressive assholes. And they were also right. Didn't help their cause that they were assholes. I'm not saying that's acceptable behaviour just because you're right, but I'm just saying the fact that they were assholes didn't make them wrong. Mandela was a terrorist, an actual terrorist. Like I've been called a terrorist that many times by the Victorian State Premier, I've lost track. But he was an actual terrorist, like actually go out and kill people to achieve a political objective type terrorist. He wasn't right about his violence, but he was right in the goals that he was pursuing. And later in life, when he renounced the violence, he went on to become a great leader and a great reformer. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist pastor and also a hypocrite, because whilst he was a pastor, he was unfaithful to his wife. Very easy to shoot a man like that down. Very easy. And what he did was wrong. But what he did with regard to civil rights in the US was completely right. All of these people are remembered because they went first or close to it. They led the charge at some point. They are the weirdo outlier edge cases that carry movements forward. And all of them could be attacked very easily. Now let me be clear, I'm not defending the asshole behaviors, but there are two really important points here. The personality type that leads someone to be an outlier so that they will go first comes with downsides. That personality profile comes with downsides, and you're going to have to work with them if you want to limit government. Because let's remember where we are. We want to limit government. That means we have to limit our obedience. Who's going to do that first? The assholes. So we're going to have to work with the assholes. This is my point. And we might even have to be them. 2, the people who are the greatest heroes who stood with courage when it mattered also have pasts and hang-ups and hypocrisies and issues. First movers will be attacked. And being their friend is going to be very difficult. I know, because I lost a lot of friends because I was one of the first movers who got attacked. You will be attacked for being an asshole. There's probably some truth to that one. If you're a first mover, if you're an edge case, an outlier, there's probably some truth to that. You'll get attacked for what you said that time 15 years ago. You'll get attacked for what you didn't say that other time 15 years ago. You'll get attacked for the mistake that you made, the mistake that you didn't make but everyone wants to believe that you made. You'll get attacked for who your parents are, for who you married, for who you've interacted with, or for who else showed up to something that you showed up to. Ask Moira Redeeming about that one. You will get attacked. And if it's not you, it's going to be the other person that had the guts that you didn't have to go first. You're either going to have to be willing to be this person or be willing to stand up next to this person and say, I know they're coming at you, I know they're attacking you, I know they're saying all kinds of things about you, and some of them are probably true, but you know what? On this issue that I'm going to support you on, you're right. And I'm going to get alongside you and I'm going to help you win. I came to this conclusion around about the darkest period for me, early 2021, early to mid 2021. It sucks to be right early, but that is the only time that it matters. You know, being right when everyone else is already right makes absolutely no difference to anyone. Doesn't help. Being right when no one else has figured it out yet means that you have the opportunity to change the world. It's the only time when it matters. Doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong most of the time, it just doesn't matter. But that one time when it does matter, and hear me well, is likely to be the moment when it costs you the most. When the whole world is at you, you either really are a crank and an idiot, or you're holding in your hand a piece of truth that the world needs to know and you need to stand and fight for. And it's on you to figure out which one's true in your particular case. Who's heard of Claudette Colvin? Any hands? I'd like to know if you've heard of Claudette Colvin before. One, maybe two, someone's not sure. Who's heard of Rosa Parks? Most of the room. Okay, that is exactly what's to be expected. Let me tell you about Claudette Colvin. She was belligerent, and I got all this from reading the newspapers from her hometown, by the way. She was belligerent, loudmouthed, rude, violent, charged with assaulting a police officer, and, adding to her shame, and much ink was spilled on this, she was pregnant out of wedlock as a black girl in 1955 America. You're starting to understand why you've never heard of her? Clearly, this woman is not a high achiever, let's just say. She was charged with disturbing the peace, battering and assaulting a police officer, and some other things that we'll get to in a minute. And the press at the time were very willing to tell you all about how awful this 15-year-old girl was. While she was on trial, she was found to be pregnant out of wedlock. Let me tell you a little bit more about Claudette. She was the outlier and weirdo who was the first one to stand up against a bad law, that being the bus segregation laws in Montgomery County, Alabama. She is a civil rights hero, even though you haven't heard of her. She's incredibly courageous, and she was right. Why haven't you heard of her? Because she was abandoned by the civil rights movement because of her circumstances, quote, unquote, pregnancy. They didn't want to talk about her. She did what she did 9 months before Rosa Parks. And Rosa Parks named her as the inspiration for what she did 9 months later in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, Claudette Colvin is a civil rights hero. But she paid an incredibly high price because she didn't become the celebrity. She left Montgomery, Alabama, where her family had lived for generations, and she had to move to New York because in her own hometown, with people that had known her family for generations, she couldn't get a job. No one would employ her. She was hassled relentlessly, labeled as a troublemaker, and literally had to move halfway across the country to New York and start a new life, even though she was the one that started a domino effect that led to the end of segregation 9 years later. Sucks to be right early, doesn't it? Right, where are we at? Let's summarize. Time check. Not good. In summary, the government is limited only by the limits of our obedience. Therefore, good people must break bad laws. However, this means we have to align ourselves with outliers or even assholes, because by definition, they are the other people that will be there with us. And I know that from personal experience. I saw them. I protested alongside them. I was one of them, let's be honest. While it sucks to be right early, that is the only time it matters. Okay, so you're all with me so far. Let's get to the brutal bit. Now what? If your conscience required you to break bad laws, could you? Would you? If you wouldn't, what is it that would stop you? Usually it's your responsibilities to the people that you love that stop you from taking these sorts of risks. The powers that be know this. We'll see an example in a second, and they will use the people that you love to ensure your compliance. Your circumstances and your care for others will push you to do bad things for good reason. Listen to this.
Go home. Otherwise, they start issuing tickets. We don't want to do it, but we will do it. Right?
Well, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. Stand up for what you believe in rather than
Please, just go home, all right? We get paid to do this, mate. I'm just as over this fucking protest as you are. By protest, I mean lockdown, all right?
Fair enough,
unfortunately,
mate, fair enough.
I've got to do what I've got to do. And that's why I'm
You
here
don't have
trying
to
to
do
talk
that.
to you.
You don't have to do that. You're choosing to do it for
I'm
a
not
paycheck.
skilled to do anything else, mate. So unfortunately, at this time of my life, that's what I have to
and
do.
the people of us that aren't skilled, we don't get paid. We're not getting food at the moment.
I hear you, mate. My wife's in the same position. She's out of a job at the moment as well. I understand you're being pissed off about it.
How perfect, how Machiavellian to have police and people fighting in the streets, both there because they're afraid they won't be able to feed their families. Credit where it's due, that is genius. And Daniel Andrews used Victoria Police in more ways than one.
Notice that? He was doing the wrong thing for the right reasons because his circumstances, in his view, would not allow him to do anything else in good conscience. His own family was weaponized against him to ensure not only his own compliance, but that he would be an enforcer for the state. So how do you make sure that you will never be him? Well, you have to eliminate as many areas of dependence as you possibly can. What are those areas that if you were in his shoes, you would be saying, but I can't do what you want me to do. I can't do what my conscience calls me to do because of these practical realities that I face. What are those things? Financial, energy supply, food supply, water, transport, whatever. Fix them so that when your test comes, you can pass it. And you won't be sitting there going, oh, I would, but I can't. Support other people to do the same thing, to get themselves into a position where they can break bad laws. And that leverage that the government has is ineffective. Build community. The less you depend on your government for your sustenance, the less leverage they have. And the more connected you are with people who will support you, the less leverage the government has. You know why I was able to do what I did? It's because we were able to eke out a survival financially, and we knew in advance that we would. And because I had a wife who was 100% in my corner. I had her support. It was only that enabled me to be able to get out there and do what I did. And if your life circumstances are going to stop you from making that tough choice to break bad laws, then you need to be working on those life circumstances so that you can make the right choice when your time comes. Have a listen to this.
Having gotten the vaccine. I really regret having gotten the vaccine. I'm sure it's fine, but I just wish when the state told me to do something, I'd be the sort of person who said no. But it turns out I'm the sort of person who says, fine. I don't understand what's going on. You're telling me it's important. Okay. And all they had to do was say, you won't be allowed to go into pubs for like a month. And I was like, put it in me. That's what I'm upset about, is that I had a principle temporarily. Like, oh, if I was in Nazi Germany, I would have stood up to the regime. I wouldn't stand up to not being able to go to a pub for a month. I would have been like, Anne Frank, she's in that attic there. I saw her. It doesn't matter what the point of principle was. The point is I would have been a chill. And that I have to live with that for the rest of my 3 or 4 more years before I have a heart attack.
He's a very funny guy, but it's a really tragic passage, isn't it? He's spot on, and he's self-aware enough to know it, and he's honest enough to admit it and make a joke out of it. But what he said is absolutely true. Let's compare that and think about the police officer we just saw. I have to do this. My circumstances won't allow me to do anything else. Let's compare it to the comedian who the thought of a month outside of a pub was too much, with Claudette Colvin. She lived nearly her entire life as a criminal. She was convicted of crimes in relation to her refusing to move from her seat in the bus, and that criminal record was only finally expunged in 2021. It took until 2018 for her to receive any official recognition in the form of a congressional certificate. Most people still don't know her name. But listen to what she said in an interview in 2008 and compare that to what you just heard from the comedian and what must be going through that police officer's head now that all the madness is over and he has to live with and think through what he did. Claudette Colvin, I feel very, very proud of what I did. I do feel like what I did was a spark and it caught on. Imagine living with that instead of what we just heard from James the comedian. Who would you rather be? See, for me, I feel the opposite of what James the comedian does. I feel like I passed a test. And I cannot begin to tell you how amazing that is, to live with that. And it cost a lot, but I have something that money can't buy. That is, that I know that if I'd been alongside James in Nazi Germany, I would have dragged him off the street before he could point out where Anne Frank was. Maybe done something terrible to him. But I now know which side of that I would have been on. I don't think it anymore, I know it. And that's an amazing thing to know about yourself. But do you have what it takes to break bad laws? In you, do you have what it takes? Given the cost, the price, given what the media and the government and your own friends and your family will probably do to you. In your circumstances, do you have circumstances in your life that are going to stop you from doing what your conscience knows you need to do? Are you willing to fix those circumstances? Because if you're not, then I put it to you that you're not serious about limited government. Because the only way we can limit government is to limit our obedience. And if you're not serious about putting yourself in a position where you can limit your obedience, then you're not serious about limited government. The limit of the government is defined by the limit of our obedience. Good people break bad laws. It sucks to be right early, but that is the only time when it matters. Those are my 3 points, but I do want to close with a video from one of the greatest days of my life. The day that I actually discovered, in the words of Claudette Colvin, that I had been a spark and that it had caught on. Not me alone, let me be clear. There were a small group. It was 70 at the start, and it grew and it waxed and it waned, and people fell by the wayside and more people joined. But eventually, after 18 months of being on the streets most weekends, playing dodgem cops with varying degrees of success. I've been tear gassed, I've been hit by cops, I've had to dodge police horses charging through, I've seen armoured vehicles on the streets of Melbourne, and mercifully I wasn't there at the time. I had the foresight to evacuate the area first, but we all saw the footage, and you've seen it in Battleground Melbourne, if nowhere else, of rubber bullets being fired by our anti-terrorism police. That's that word again. You need them to stop the terrorists. Fired at unarmed anti-lockdown protesters. Now what happened was we successfully shamed Victoria Police, sort of Mahatma Gandhi-esque. He used non-violence to shame the British. We used a similar strategy, and finally we shamed Victoria Police. And after they fired on us with rubber bullets and they realised that we still weren't stopping, and the only escalation from there was to start actually killing people, it was the Victoria Police that, through a leak to the Herald Sun, actually said, we're stopping the violence. It's time to put away the tear gas, was the headline. And they told the government, we're not doing this anymore. And quickly the word spread, and we realised we could protest and not be in fear of our lives. After 18 months. That day, and the video that I'm about to show you is from the absolute best day of my life. And I can say that because my wife's not here. No, actually, I said that to my wife afterwards, and she said, you're absolutely right, and it was far more satisfying. So, I'm going to give the last word to myself from November 2021. And, the price to get to this moment was extremely high. Not just for me, but for an enormous number of people. This is the most expensive piece of footage you will ever see, not in dollars, but in the cost to people that you have met and know and love. But if I could have this moment again, I'd do it again. I'd go through it again, just to get back to this.
Daniel Andrews tried to tear us apart. That is what brought us together. It was when he took our jobs and our businesses that we truly began to work together. It was when he locked us down that we began to stand up together. When he sowed division amongst our friends and our families, that is when we found our tribe. Daniel Andrews has abused us, threatened us, sent armed agents of the state to some of our homes, and yet here we stand. Daniel Andrews has arrested us, imprisoned some of us, and sent men to shoot at us, and here we stand. Daniel Andrews tried to break us, break our will with the full weight of his twisted so-called laws. But we realized a deeper truth, that good people break bad laws. Our future is in our hands. It is up to us. Future generations are watching us. They are reading about this moment in a history book, and they will go to you and they will say, what did you do? I am proud to say that I risked everything, and I will accept nothing less than freedom. Freedom for me, freedom for my children, and freedom for us all.
Good people, are you ready to limit the government? Thank you.